Hi everyone, good morning. Let's just wait for 2 more minutes. We have a lot of people joining us today, and then we'll start. Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to the seventh edition of the Model Conference of Parties by WWF India, or you may better know it as MCOP 7. We're really happy to have all of you with us here as we kick off this 5 day virtual conference. So, over the next few days, we'll explore biodiversity, global environmental action, and the work happening around conservation. You'll hear from a lot of experts. You'll learn about the global processes that guide environmental action, and you'll also explore different perspectives on conservation. Eventually, you will also start working on your own MCOP action plan. So, I hope that you're all super excited about MCOP. There is a lot coming up. And to introduce myself, I'm Anukriti. I'll be your host for today. I'll be taking you through day one. But before we get started, let's do a quick check in. All right, let's do a quick vibe check, as we all call it these days. So, you have access to the chat for today's webinar, and I want you all to just drop in one emoji in the chat which expresses how you're feeling today. So, how are you feeling this morning? You'll see a few emojis on the screen. Pick the one that best describes your mood right now and drop it in the chat. We want to see how you're feeling. Are you supercharged? Are you positive? Are you curious? Okay, let's look at the chat. Wow, I see a lot of responses. A lot of people are excited. There are a few curious minds as well. We have someone who's happy and positive. I see a huge yeah in the chat as well. So I love that. That's great energy. All right, great. So I love the mix of responses here. Now let's move on. We have a long day ahead. So here are just a few quick things before we actually start with the day. All right. So these are the house rules for the virtual conference that we have ahead. And these rules are to be followed for all of the 5 days. So please make sure that your Zoom name is your own name, and you also need to mention your school name. So in case you are a full school team that has joined from a single device, you can just rename your Zoom account to your school's name. All right. So I've given an example on the screen, like Anukriti, KV Delhi. So you can rename yourself like that. And for the other ground rules, you need to keep in mind that your entire MCOP 7 team needs to join these sessions, and we'll be using the chat. We'll have some polls, some Q&As. Please make sure that you're actively participating throughout the conference and that you're sharing your thoughts in the chat as well. Any insights, any questions. Now, one of the most important things for an online meeting like this is that you ensure that you have a good internet connection. Okay. And another important thing, as you can see on the screen, we've mentioned is that please keep the webinar link for all of these sessions within your MCOP 7 team. This is exclusively for you, and that's why we want you to just focus on attending these sessions by yourself. Please don't share it outside, okay? Another thing that we would like you to remember is that you will be gaining a lot of knowledge throughout these 5 days. So we do recommend that you sit ready with some notebooks or with your pencils and you take notes, because you might find a lot of information in these sessions that will be useful when you actually start implementing your projects. So that is all for the ground rules. Please quickly just read through them on the screen again. And in case you or anyone from your team is not able to attend a session on any of the days, don't worry, okay? Because we'll be sharing the recordings with you. We'll be sharing the entire recording for today by this afternoon. So you can just watch these recordings later and catch up. So let's begin. Now, I want to start by saying that the theme for today is setting the stage, global environmental frameworks and youth action. So we do have the basics covered, right? Today is really about building a foundation for your MCOP 7 journey. Let's take a look at the agenda. We'll start by understanding what MCOP itself is and where it comes from and what we expect from all of you as participants. From there, we look at the bigger picture of global environmental action and how countries work together through international agreements. Sounds exciting, right? We'll then focus on the Convention on Biological Diversity, or what is better known as the CBD, and we'll understand why it is so important to biodiversity conservation worldwide. Okay? And finally, we'll bring the conversation back to all of you as young people, as the torch bearers of conservation and biodiversity, and we'll hear from uh, some members of the youth community who are making a difference at the global level. So that's what the day looks like. And to reiterate, we'll be moving from the bigger global picture to the role that young people like you can play within it. So make sure you're paying attention because this will give you the foundation you need for the rest of the conference. So let's get started. I would like to invite Ms. Neha Raghav, who is the Director of Environment Education at WWF India, to take us through a quick introductory segment on MCOP and to share some encouraging and inspiring words with all of you today. So, Ms. Neha, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Anupriti. Good morning, everyone, to every student and teacher delegate who's joining us on this call. From wherever you're logging in today, welcome to the 7th edition of WWF India's Model Conference of Parties. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our experts who you will be shortly introduced with for facilitating sessions through these 5 days. So I'd also like to express my heartfelt gratitude to them. So even though we are meeting through our screens today and not in a conference room, for the next few days, I would want you all to think of yourself as negotiators at the real conference of parties. Think of yourself as scientists, policymakers, and advocates representing your school, whose decisions will shape the future of biodiversity, first around your cities, and then your country, and eventually this whole planet. And this is not a small responsibility. And I hope you feel its weight, because the weight is exactly what makes this conference matter, screens or no screens. Every year we sit down to design MCOP. We ask ourselves one question: what do we actually want all our delegates this year to walk away with? It can't just be the learning from experts or the thrill of drafting action plan for solving a local biodiversity problem. What we really want is something that is much deeper. We want you to walk away with a scientific understanding of conservation. We want you to understand what is happening at the global stage. We want you to know how those decisions taken at the global stage are translated on the ground at the national level. So these are some of the things I would want you all to walk away with. Because biodiversity crisis is not just a policy problem. Every question that you will grapple with over the next few days: how do we protect a very important biodiversity species? How do we restore a degraded wetland? How do we balance a community's livelihood with an ecosystem survival? Every one of these questions it has a scientific backbone, and no solution will hold up if it is not grounded in scientific evidence. This is the spirit of MCOP that I'd like to convey to all of you. Yeah. MCOP is a laboratory where you will test your ideas against evidence. So as you step into your MCOP journey, I want you all to leave with one suggestion: be scientists first, and then advocates of conservation, and then start taking action in your everyday life. Read the data, question your own assumptions, ask what it takes to make biodiversity in our ecosystems thriving again. This is what real conservation demands. And this is what this conference expects of you. The world does not need more people who just talk convincingly. Of course, we do need them, but it needs more than that. It needs people who understand it, who can turn that understanding into solutions that hold up in the real world, not just on papers. So let this be your mandate for the next few days. Understand deeply, question rigorously. You'll have a lot of experts who you will be interacting with, and test every solution and back it up with science. With that, delegates, I am absolutely excited and honored to declare the seventh edition of WWF India's Model Conference of Parties officially open. So, thank you so much. Over to you, Anukriti.
Thank you so much, Ms. Neha. Those were certainly very meaningful words, and I do hope that our participants here will be taking away a lot of inspiration from that. So we've heard from our own director over here, but now we have someone very special for all of you, and she will be addressing the conference through a recorded message. So we have a recorded message by the Director General of WWF International herself, Kirsten. And now I would like to just stream that message for all of you. So let's do that.
General of WWF International. Around the world, people... Hi everyone, I'm Kirsten Scout, Director General of WWF International. Around the world, people are coming together to address one of the greatest challenges of our time, conserving the rich diversity of life on Earth and building harmony between people and our planet. Across WWF's global network, we work with scientists, with governments, indigenous people and local communities, businesses, educators, and many, many others. Because biodiversity conservation calls for many perspectives, many different kinds of knowledge, and more than anything, long-term collaboration. This is why participating in initiatives like WWF India's Model Conference of Parties is so incredibly valuable. The environmental challenges we face today don't have simple solutions. They ask us to listen, to question, to understand different viewpoints, and to work together towards decisions that are informed by science and grounded in local realities. The Model Conference of Parties offers you all an opportunity to experience exactly that. It encourages you to think critically, to collaborate with others, and to explore how global biodiversity goals can inspire meaningful action within your own communities. The ideas you develop, the conversations you'll have, and the experiences you will gain through this program extend far beyond MCOP, because they will help build the knowledge, the confidence, and the perspectives we need to engage with environmental challenges throughout your lives, whatever path you will choose to follow. To the educators supporting this journey, thank you for encouraging curiosity, critical thinking, and collaboration. Nurturing students through opportunities like these, you're helping students connect global issues with local action in ways that are both practical and lasting. I hope you will leave this experience with new perspectives and meaningful connections, and more than anything, the confidence to keep asking questions, to keep working together, and to keep contributing to the conservation of our beautiful shared planet. I wish you all the very best for your MCOP journey. Thank you.
Wow, wasn't that inspiring, everyone? So, as you begin your 5-day journey through this virtual conference, it is indeed a really fitting opportunity to also learn from people at the global stage who have on ground experience in exactly the kind of action that you are going to take in your own community. So, with that, we have some very interesting conversations planned for you ahead. So, right. So we have two special guests, Abhineet and Anamya, who were the winners during the last year's MCOP edition. So last year we had over 400 schools that had participated in MCOP, which was the sixth edition of MCOP. We had thousands of students who were sitting here, just like all of you, attending these sessions. And then they went back into their own communities and they took action. We had we had about 100 action plans submitted to us. So that means that there were 100 different stories of fantastic on-ground biodiversity conservation and environmental preservation that happened last year. And this year, you could be one of those people, right? So just to pep you up a little bit before we head into all the expert sessions for the day, we have Abhineet and Anamya from Little Angels High School, who will be sharing a little bit about their own MCOP journey from last year. And this year, they have something super exciting in store for them as well. So they'll be telling us about that too. So I would like to invite Anamya and Abhineet on screen.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Abhineet Bansal.
I'm an Amrata.
So MCOP 6 started with a simple question actually. We had textile waste around us and we wanted to do something useful with it. So over the course of time in our project, we converted around 100 kilos of textile waste into usable products like rugs, scrunchies, and etc. So I would say looking back, MCOP 6 taught us that even a small school project can create a meaningful impact when you take it seriously. Also, we have been very fortunate and grateful enough to say that we've been given the opportunity by WWF India to represent our school and WWF India to in UN CBT COP 17 happening later this year in Armenia. So it's a very big thing for us. We're very happy. Yeah.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much, Abhineet. So, could you briefly take us through your MCOP journey from participating in MCOP 6 to where you are today? Just a few words.
So basically, this is as Abhinit told us, we turned 100 kilograms of textile waste into usable stuff. And I believe that in doing so, we not only help the environment, we also empowered women artisans in our local community. So we partnered with local tailoring MSMEs and local tailoring hubs. And I think that has helped a lot of people. And besides that, our school is now a lot cleaner. The surroundings are a lot cleaner. So yeah, that's
Okay, that's great to hear. So, we did hear about your MCOP journey and where you're headed next. But if I had to ask you, what were some of your biggest learnings from MCOP, or what were your biggest takeaways? Something that has stuck with you since your MCOP journey. What would you say?
So one of the biggest things that we both learned was that, first of all, there are two things. First of all, that good intentions don't automatically wake up one day and suit up and say that now we'll turn into meaningful action. No, that's not how it works. You have to take that step. And it was incredibly fulfilling to see what we had planned turn into real action. But I think where we lagged was in timing and time management. I think we could have utilized our summer holidays or any other holidays better to increase our reach and increase awareness in local communities. So I believe that's that. And now that we think about it, now that we put all this concoction of our learnings together, we not only think about what we need to do, we start thinking about when to start, who to involve, how to make that impact last, and all those other questions that only experience can teach us. So that's what we learned.
Okay, that's really nice to hear. And all of you students who are also attending this virtual conference today, it could be you here tomorrow sharing your learnings and your takeaways from MCOP, right? So that's one encouragement for all of you from our side. And okay, Abhineet and Anamya, I have another question for you. So you did mention that you're headed to COP 17 this year in October, right?
Right.
So would you like to share a little bit about what you'll be doing there and how your MCOP experience has helped you prepare for this journey? Also, for all your peers and your friends over here, if you could just briefly mention what do we mean when we say COP 17? What exactly is it? Just briefly for their reference.
Yeah, so first of all, we don't know our roles yet, so that's a mystery, but we are really excited to go there and share our experience and learn what others have done. So we know that everyone will be coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, different communities. And so it would be really exciting to know what worked out, for them, what didn't work out, and whether we can make do with what didn't work out for them. So that's that. And besides that, I think we want to learn more than anything their perspectives on biodiversity and global matters. So the voice of the youth, I think when we have healthy discussions, that is where real change starts. So we would love to engage in that. And COP17 is basically a chance for us to scale what we did in MCOP 6 at a much gigantic scale. And we look forward to come with many, many stories and many, many exciting ideas that will surely help us in our school life.
All right, that sounds great. So if in one line you could just, share with your friends here what is COP17 and where is it happening?
So we're headed to Armenia in October this year. Uh, I think it is a part of UN. So of course a great transition because we did MCOP, so that is Model Corporation of Parties, and now we're heading to actual Corporation of Parties.
Yes.
So it's like a really huge thing for us, and we're really excited. So yeah, we hope to learn and hope to see what happens next.
So it's a part of the CBD part, the Convention on Biological Diversity.
Yes, that sounds exciting. So finally, I have one last question for you, and that would be what advice, tips, or any words of encouragement would you like to share with everyone who's participating in MCOP this year?
I would like to say to every one of you that I would say don't overthink it at all. Because when you pick something, so pick something you actually care about and like run with it. You'll probably change your idea a lot of times because when you start actually implementing and thinking about the idea, you start that, yeah, there is a flaw, we can change that, we could change that. So, and somehow you end up with something which is actually better than what you originally started with. So I would recommend talking to people who actually try things, mess up and fix them, and more importantly, keep going. I would say the coolest part of MCOP isn't having the perfect idea, which it seems how far you can take a simple one and how impact you can make. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Abhineet and Anamya. Your insights were certainly very refreshing to hear, and I am sure that a lot of the other students that are here today would take your stories as inspiration. So now I want to pose this question to all of our attendees here today. So would you like to type in the chat exactly how excited you are after hearing from Abhineet and Anamya? Would you also like to go to an international conference by the United Nations? Let's hear from you. Yes, we are motivated. I see someone who's extremely motivated with an answer in caps lock. 100 on 10, yes, definitely. Wow, these are all very, very encouraging responses. And so this is a sign for you to be very dedicated, very committed throughout all of these 5 sessions of the virtual conference, or 5 days of the virtual conference that will be happening. There will be a lot to learn, and there will be a lot to act upon based on these learnings. So you will get a chance to implement your own projects. You'll get a chance to make your own mark in the world out there. And maybe all of you would also get a chance, like Abhineet and Anamya here, to present your ideas on the global stage, right? So with that, thank you so much, Abhineet. Thank you so much, Anamya. And
Thank you
we'll
so
move
much.
on with the session.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. So yes. So thank you so much once again to both of you from Little Angels High School for sharing your experiences. And now we're going to take a step back, right? We heard from the students themselves, the ones who were implementing the project. But now we're going to take a step back and we're going to look at the bigger picture of environmental action around the world. So we now have a session for you which will help build the foundation of multilateral environmental agreements. And I would just like to say that we all do know that environmental challenges, they rarely stop at national borders, right? So how do countries work together to address these challenges? Now that's where multilateral environmental agreements, or MEAs, come in. So in this session, we look at the basics of multilateral environmental agreements. And for that, I would like to welcome Ms. Satvika Krishnan, who is a senior associate at Enviro Legal Defense Firm. She is also the coordinator of the Environmental Law and Development Foundation. So, Ms. Satvika, the screen is all yours. I will stop sharing now so that you can present your slides. And we are super excited to learn from all of your experience out there on the global stage.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So happy to be here. Could you just guide me with the slide sharing, please?
Right. So you will see a button called share at the bottom of your screen with an arrow pointing upwards.
Got it.
Yes, you can then just share your presentation through that. Yes, we can see your screen. Yes, we're able to see your presentation.
Still?
Oh no, it minimized. If you'd like, I can present for you.
Yes, please. I think that would be easier.
Okay. You might have to stop sharing your screen for me to be able to do
I'll
that.
just do it 1 second. Um, yeah.
All right.
Has it stopped?
All right. Yes, it did, and I've started sharing your slides as well.
Okay. I feel like I'm still screen sharing though.
No, you're
No,
not.
stopped, right? Okay, so are we at slide 1?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. For the next 25 minutes or so, that's the time that's been given to me. I want to tell you guys a story of how the world set about governing its own environment. It's a story with real successes in it and some serious failures. Also, a very strange piece of machinery built along the way. Slide 2, please. So let me name the object first, because the phrase sounds far more forbidding than the thing it describes. A multilateral environmental agreement is a treaty, which all of you know, between 3 or more states about an environmental problem. That's the entire definition, right? And there are now roughly 1,190 of them, 1,500 bilateral agreements or so, and about 250 other instruments. Nobody planned that. No one really sat down in 1970 and designed a system. It accumulated in waves over 50 years in response to particular crises and particular arguments. So this talk is really about the story of how. Can we go to slide 3, please? But before we get into the story, 3 facts, because I want to promise you something at the outset. Nothing in this talk is arbitrary. Every odd feature of this field is a consequence of one of these 3, and I'll point back at them as we go ahead. The first one, the problems cross borders, right? So no state can solve ozone depletion or climate change on its own territory alone. Cooperation here is not idealism. It is the arithmetic of it all, right? So fact 2, the only tool available is consent. There's no world legislature, as we know. There is no world police force. A state is bound only by what it has agreed to be bound by. So this law has to be negotiated and it can be refused. Fact 3 is that therefore obligation gets built very slowly, which is why you get framework conventions before protocols, why you get shared principles rather than commands, and why you get institutions instead of enforcement. So hold these 3 things in your head. Everything else follows from these 3 facts. Next slide, please. So 6 movements then, the problem and the tool, Stockholm in 1972, where the machinery got built, the wave of treaties that followed, Rio and the vocabulary of all these agreements are written in. Then what's actually inside an MEA? And who else is in the room besides governments? And I'll finish by giving you 7 questions, which are the ones I use whenever someone hands me a treaty I've never read before. Next slide. And the one after that. Yeah. So fact one is illustrated by this image. So within living memory, human beings saw the planet from outside for the first time. It changed what the word environment meant because it made the planet a single object rather than a collection of places. And notice what the photograph does not have on it, lines. Next slide. So same planet, same coastlines, now entirely made of lines. We drew every one of them. In order to say one specific thing, this is mine, this is not yours, and I have sovereignty over the resources and the people inside this boundary. Remember the word sovereignty. It is the organizing fact of this entire field. It's also the central obstacle. Next slide. So climate change crosses a border without asking. Emissions released in one state raise the sea around another. A river does not check a passport, and a migratory bird holds no citizenship. Next slide. Which takes us to fact two, and to the one thing that makes this field unlike any other law you have ever studied. At the national level, a legislature makes law, an executive implements it, a judiciary enforces it. International law has none of that architecture. It's made by sovereign states that must consent to limit their own sovereignty. Sit with how strange that is. The entities being regulated are the same entities writing the rules and deciding whether the rules apply to them. The consequences are pretty practical. A state that does not want to participate can simply decline to be bound by it. A state can accept a convention and refuse its amendments, and amendments are exactly where standards get tightened. And so texts get weakened negotiation by negotiation until the most reluctant state can live with them. So here's my first question to you. Given all of that, would we be better off without a world environmental legislature, a body with the power to make binding rules and actually enforce them? The answer most rooms arrive at is no, for two reasons worth saying out loud. First, it would concentrate enormous power in very few hands, and most of us do not want that, regardless of how good the cause is. Second, and more uncomfortably, such a body would almost certainly carry the same vested interests and imbalances that already shape the world, because it would be built by the powerful. So this is the system we have, and there's a serious case that it's the system we want, which means that you read a treaty that looks weak on paper. The right question is not, why is this so feeble? It is, what did it take to get every one of these states to sign anything at all to begin with? Next slide. One last piece of vocabulary before the story, because it lets you place every document that follows. Hard law is binding. Treaties, whatever they are called, conventions, covenants, agreements, protocols, customary international law, general principles of law, MEAs live here. And note carefully, hard does not mean that it's easy to enforce. Hard versus soft is about the binding nature of the law and nothing else. So soft law is not binding. Declarations, General Assembly resolutions, guidelines, standards, Stockholm and Rio are both soft law. You cannot take a state to court for breaching soft law. But don't dismiss it, because soft law is where states test new norms before committing to them. It is where scientists, NGOs, and industry get a genuine hand in drafting, which they never get during treaty negotiations. And it's where a great deal of hard law actually begins. The traffic runs both ways. In fact, the Stockholm Principle 21, which we will meet in a few minutes, began as soft law and now is a binding custom. The Law of the Sea Convention worked in reverse, largely codifying what states were already doing. Next slide. Next one. So June 1972, we have Stockholm, the generative moment of this entire field. What drove it was practical, not philosophical. So acid rain falling on Scandinavian forests from smokestacks in other countries, the ozone layer, transboundary pollution that made it obvious that no state could fix this alone. That is fact one, arriving as a political emergency. 3 things came out of Stockholm, and we will still live inside all 3. One is an action plan to protect the global environment, UNEP, a permanent home for the environment inside the UN system, and the Stockholm Declaration, 26 principles, non-binding, and arguably the most influential document in this field. One detail that carries a much larger story. UNEP is headquartered in Nairobi, and it remains the only major UN program headquartered in the global south. That was not administrative convenience. It was a deliberate assertion by developing countries that if there was going to be a global environmental agency, it could not sit in Geneva or New York, which brings me to the part of the story that usually gets left out altogether. Next slide. So by 1972, most developing countries had been independent for barely a decade or two. They had watched the industrialized world fill the atmosphere on the way up, and they were now being invited to a conference about restraint. And they had one instrument of real power. The UN General Assembly, the rule is one country, one vote. By numbers, the newly independent states had the majority. So in the months before Stockholm, the group of 77, or the G77 as you all know it, used exactly that, sponsoring a series of General Assembly resolutions, carrying one unmistakable message placed on the record before anybody sat down to talk about the environment even. Permanent sovereignty over natural resources. You're not going to use a new environmental agenda to tell us what we may do with what lies in our ground, is essentially what they were saying. Remember that phrase, because almost everything that follows grows out of it. And that condition is worth stopping on because it's the central conflict of this entire field. Let me put it to you as squarely as I can. The North says, the atmosphere is full, everybody has to cut now. The South says, you filled it. You industrialized on cheap coal and on our resources. And now that we have arrived at the door, you want to close it. So who is right? They both are, and that is precisely the problem. Neither position is unreasonable. The atmosphere genuinely does not care who emitted the carbon. And it is genuinely unjust to ask a country to forgo the development path that every wealthy country initially took. 2 true things pointing in opposite directions. That is the North-South divide for you in a nutshell. And this field spent the next 20 years building an answer to it. The answer, when it arrives at Rio, is called common but differentiated responsibilities. Next. Out of Stockholm came the Declaration, and 2 of its principles set terms for everything that came after. Principle 1 gives a fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life in an environment of equality that permits a life of dignity and well-being. That's the earliest ancestor of the right to a healthy environment. And look at the second half, which is almost always cut from the textbooks. Apartheid, racial segregation, colonial and other forms of oppression, and foreign domination stand condemned and must be eliminated. That is in the founding environmental declaration put there by countries that had just escaped those atrocities. Principle 21 is the one to memorize. States have the sovereign right to exploit their own resources pursuant to their own environmental policies, and the responsibility to ensure that activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. Sovereignty joined to a no-harm rule in a single sentence. That is the grand bargain of this field. And here's what makes it extraordinary. It arrived in a non-binding declaration in 1972, and it is now customary international law binding on every, whether or not it ever signed anything. Remember what I said about soft law about 2 minutes ago? This is the clearest example we have of it hardening into hard law. Next slide. Next one, please. Okay, and then we have the wave. There's no need to memorize this slide. Just look at its shape, because the shape is the argument. In the 1970s, the treaties are concrete and bounded. So Ramsar on wetlands, World Heritage, CITES on trade in endangered species, MAPOL, migratory species, long-range transboundary air pollution, a named species, a named sea, a named pollutant, right? In the 1980s, the scale changes. So the Law of the Sea Convention, Vienna on the ozone layer, and the Montreal Protocol, Basel on hazardous waste, and the 1990s brings the giants, which is the Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity, which I understand you all are going to discuss later. Desertification, Rotterdam on hazardous chemicals, and the RUs on public participation. On 2001 onwards, persistent organic pollutants, mercury in Minamata. So these are all the treaties that came after. Next slide, please. That's essentially 2 generations worth of treaties. And the difference between the two is what actually matters. So the first generation is neighbor to neighbor treaties, right? Somebody is doing something to somebody else and the treaty sits between them. The second generation is of a different kind. Ozone, oceans, climate, biodiversity. No one specifically owns the problem, but everybody suffers it. And every state has to be inside the tent for things to work at all. 2 ideas made that leap possible, and they turn up in the text constantly, which I already mentioned. Common heritage of humankind covers the places outside anyone's sovereignty, which is the high seas, Antarctica, outer space. And common concern of humankind covers the things done inside your own territory that change everybody's world. So common concern is the radical one. It's the legal language that defeats the sentence, my territory, my emissions, not your business. Climate change is a great example of that, and biodiversity loss is a close second. Next slide. Now fact 3, made concrete, because this is what confuses people the first time they open an environmental treaty and they see no obligations in it. So you cannot get agreement on hard numbers at the very beginning. You agree to the frame first and put the numbers in a separate instrument later, once the science has landed and the politics has moved. So ozone is the perfect model for that. The Vienna Convention in 1985 said in effect that ozone layer matters and we will cooperate. 2 years later, we had the Montreal Protocol, which said which chemicals, by how much, and by when. It worked, and it remains the greatest success story of this field. Climate followed a very similar architecture. So you have the Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, and then the Kyoto Protocol, and later the Paris Agreement made under it. That is what it means when we say some conventions consent to add protocols later. So whenever you read an MEA, ask what layer you're holding. A framework convention often obliges nobody to do anything specific, and people conclude the treaty is toothless. The obligation usually lives elsewhere, in the protocol, in an annex, or in a decision of a conference of the parties. Next slide, please. So 20 years after Stockholm was Rio. And Rio is where the argument from 1972 finally gets settled on paper. So the South conceded that every country has a role to play in protecting the environment. In exchange, the North acknowledged that it bears a different and a greater responsibility, and agreed on finance and technology transfer. And look at what the same year produced: the Rio Declaration, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Convention on Biological Diversity. 2 of the largest MEAs in existence, arriving alongside the declaration. That is the bargain being spent. Next slide. Here's a sentence it produced. The answer to the question I put to you a few minutes ago. In view of the different contributions to global environmental degradation, states have common but differentiated responsibilities. The developed countries acknowledge the responsibility that they bear in the technologies and financial resources they command. Everybody has a role, right? But historic contribution and present capability decide who does more and who does less. That is the compromise between two true things. You'll meet it in the annexes of the Kyoto Protocol and in the long argument about whether Paris preserved it or quietly dissolved it. And when you do, remember, it did not come from a drafting committee. It came from decolonization. Next. The principles. So I want to say that what they are for before I show you the list, because otherwise 14 abstractions is simply something to be endured. They give you a framework for negotiating, right? If you and I sat down tomorrow to draft a treaty on, say, geoengineering, where would we begin? What are we trying to protect exactly? And you start with the principles, and then around that is how you draft the articles. They give you a framework for resolving disputes. When something transboundary goes wrong, they frame the argument. Did you notify us? Did you consult us in good faith? Did you assess the impact first? They drive convergence in national and subnational law. They integrate this field with trade law and human rights law, which otherwise fragment badly. And they can eventually be codified into a general covenant. And underneath all of it, they are a shared language. States run on radically different political and economic systems. Before you can agree on anything, you need words that mean the same thing on both sides of the table. That is exactly what these principles are. Next slide. So here are the principles. There are 14 of them, and I'm not going to read them to you. Y'all can have a quick look of it, at it, take a picture if you want to. I'm sure a lot of these y'all have heard of already. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do instead is to group them because every one of these 14 is answering one of 4 questions, right? The first one is, what may a state do inside its own borders? State sovereignty, which extends to land, subsoil and minerals, waters and airspace, the right to development, the right to run your own economy and secure a minimum quality of life for your people, and permanent sovereignty over natural resources, which we met before in Stockholm as well. One qualification: sovereignty over people is not absolute. Human rights law placed limits on how a state may treat individuals. Second is, what does a state owe its neighbors? The obligation not to cause transboundary harm, now customary law, good neighborliness, and the duty to cooperate, prior notification and consultation in good faith. You tell your neighbor before you build the thing on the border. Prior informed consent, the duty to assess environmental impacts before you act, and state responsibility, meaning a state answers for its own acts and for anyone acting under its direction or control, corporations also included. Third, what does a state owe everybody? Common heritage of humankind and common concern of humankind, which we've done before, the precautionary principle where damage could be serious or irreversible, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing action, and public participation and access to information, which is Rio Principle 10 and the whole basis of the Aarhus and Escazú agreements. Fourth, who does more and who pays? Again, common but differentiated responsibility, which decides who is obliged to act, and polluter and user pays. which decides who carries the cost and which is fiercely contested, not least by developing countries who see it as an obstacle to the right to development. Now, of those 14, 2 cause more argument than the other 12 combined. Which 2 do you think? Common but differentiated responsibility and polluter and user pays, right? And notice what the 2 of them have in common. Every other principle on that list is about procedure or about scope. Who to tell, what to assess, whose territory it is. These 2 are about money and obligation. Who has to act and who has to pay for it. That is the reliable rule of this field. Negotiations do not break down over the science. They break down over differentiation and finance. If you want to know where a treaty text will be fought over, find the sentence about who pays. 2 of the 14 deserve a note on the critique because you will meet it constantly. One is prior informed consent. It's the engine of the Basel and Rotterdam Conventions. Countries have banned hazardous pesticides at home and continued exporting them to the global south. And what international law requires in that situation is consent, which is exactly where the critique lands. It's procedural, not substantive. It does not ban the pesticide. It says manufacture it and ship it so long as you obtain agreement first. Procedure is easier to win on and it protects less. Both are true at once. And prior informed consent turns up in a third place also. Free, prior, and informed consent for indigenous peoples before development affecting their territories, a right violated far more often than it is observed, and increasingly a strong principle in this field. Next slide, please. Finally, 3 principles that I would say are still arriving. The right to a healthy environment, intergenerational equity, and rights of nature. Next slide. Next one. Now the part that almost nobody explains, and it changes how you read all of this. An MEA is not just a document. Each one builds itself an institution, and almost every MEA you will ever open has the same 3 organs: a secretariat, a conference of the parties, and scientific bodies. Someone I taught once called this the backstage crew, and I've used this phrase ever since. The treaty is the performance. This is everything that makes that performance possible. And for anyone here looking for international law work, this is an entire architecture of institutions supporting these treaties. Next slide. So the Secretariat provides support to the parties, sometimes housed within the UN environment and sometimes independent. It reports on compliance, it organizes the information systems relating to the convention and the issues it deals with. It employs or fosters financial mechanisms for implementing projects, and it assists and services the periodic meetings of the Conference of Parties. Now, notice the first of those. Reporting on compliance, not enforcing it, collecting and processing what states say about themselves. Next slide. The states that ratify or accede are called parties, and they meet at the Conference of Parties. This is the primary decision-making organ of the treaty itself. It apprises how implementing is going at the national level. It evaluates the reports submitted by national governments, who again are self-reporting. It deliberates on all aspects of the agreement. It resolves new or additional issues, including interpreting what an obligation actually means, and it revises the treaty when necessary, which is how protocols and amendments come into being. This is what turns a static document into a living regime. And this is where the acronym in the news comes from. The 26th Conference of the Parties to the Climate Convention met in Glasgow. Whenever you hear COP, it is this. The Climate COP is simply the most visible one, but every MEA has its own, as you all are already aware, since some of you may be attending the biodiversity one. Next slide. So the third organ is a scientific body, right? Formal bodies that accompany the agreements and meet through the COPs, supplying the data on which treaties are negotiated, implementation is monitored, and obligations are interpreted. The best known is the IPCC, an independent body founded under the auspices of the World Meteorological Organization, best known for its comprehensive assessments on climate change. It works closely with the Secretariat and the Conference of the Parties of the Climate Convention without being part of either. And what brings me to the question you should be asking by now. If states report on their own compliance and nobody can enforce anything, why does any of this work at all? Why do states comply? 4 answers, and not one of them is force. First one being reputation. States that break treaties get named in a forum where they then have to sit for decades alongside everyone who watched. Second is reciprocity. You want the others to keep their side, so you keep yours. Evidence. In a system with no coercion, science is the main source of pressure. What the IPCC establishes largely determines what states can plausibly continue to refuse to do. And the last one is domestication. This is the big one. Once a treaty is written in international law, it stops depending on international goodwill and starts being enforced by national courts against national governments at the instance of ordinary citizens. That is where the teeth actually are. Next slide. Next one, please. Okay, so back to the agency that Stockholm created. It sets the global agenda and promotes the implementation of treaties. So 3 things that I want you to know. It sits in Nairobi, as I mentioned already, the only major UN program headquartered in the global south. It administers or provides secretariat functions for around 15 MEAs, and it runs on voluntary contributions with nothing like the budget of an agency such as UNDP, for example. Enormous influence, modest means. One practical note, its website is a genuine treasure trove. If you are researching any of this, start there rather than with a textbook. Next. 2 others I'd like to mention. UNDP, founded in 1965, works in around 170 countries on poverty, inequality, and resilience. It does not merely monitor, it runs actual development projects, which is why it has such a large indirect effect on the environment. And it has considerably more money than UNEP. And then we have the high-level political forum, the central platform for follow-up and review of the 2030 agenda and the sustainable development goals. It meets annually, and it replaced the Commission on Sustainable Development, which itself came out of Rio. Notice what it runs on. Voluntary self-reporting by states, the same pattern at every level of this architecture. Next slide. The IUCN, which fits none of the categories. Not a UN entity, not an NGO. It's a union in which state governments, government agencies, non-governmental organizations, and indigenous peoples organizations are all members of the same body. 1,400 member organizations, around 15,000 experts across 6 commissions, around 900 staff, offices in about 50 countries. It shapes MEAs in 2 ways. Directly, through the red list of threatened species, which feeds straight into the operation of CITES, and through its members who take the resolutions adopted at its World Conservation Congress home and press them into their own governments. A recent Congress voted to support, not recent, I would say maybe like 5 to 6 years old, to support indigenous rights and food sovereignty, and to call for an end to fossil fuel subsidies. So none of that binds anybody, all of it moves. Next slide. Now, the non-state actors who matter here more than in almost any other field of international law. NGOs who draft, monitor, attend, and publish what states tend to leave out. Scientists and academics who shape soft law in a way they never shape treaty drafting. Corporations present at negotiations and lobbying hard, frequently to strip rights language out of the text, and also the actor whose behavior most of these agreements are ultimately trying to change. And courts and movements. Public interest litigation in India, where citizen petition the Supreme Court directly, and where the right to a healthy environment was read into the right to life. Pioneering environmental litigation in the Philippines, the agenda case in Netherlands. The Global South has been strikingly inventive here, and the standard account of this field tends to leave that out very often. The cost is real too. The Philippines, Colombia, and Mexico record among the highest numbers of environmental defenders killed. That is the enforcement environment these treaties actually operate in. Next. So something usable to take away. At some point, somebody will hand you a treaty that you've never read. 200 pages, annexes, protocols, COP decisions. These are the 7 questions I use, and they work on any MEA in existence. First one being, what is the objective? Which is usually illustrated in Article 2, and it tells you what the whole thing is all about. How is that objective operationalized? The gap between the ambition and the missionary is often the most interesting thing in the document. Third, what specific obligations do states incur? Be precise here. Shall or should, for example, right? Are those obligations different for different countries? This is where you often find common but differentiated responsibilities doing the work or failing to. Then we have the principles that are invoked. You know all 14 now. It's just a question of identifying it in the treaty. What mechanisms are created? The secretariat, the COP, the scientific body, the financial mechanism, the backstage crew, as I said, basically. And what are the gaps? In substance or in implementation, there's always a gap. A simple example, there's still no global treaty on air pollution. Regional agreements in Europe and North America, regimes for particular pollutants, but no global instrument. Next slide. So that's the story. It begins with a photograph of a planet that has no lines on it. It arrives at 1190 agreements approximately, an architecture of secretariats and conferences, and a vocabulary that states now use to argue. Every one of these agreements began as a problem that crossed a border and ended as a sentence that somebody had to fight for word by word in a room. And none of it becomes real until it is implemented at home. Next slide. Thank you. Sorry, I think you're muted. I can't.
Thank you so much, Ms. Satvika. That was truly a deep dive into MEAs. And if we have any questions from the students, we will be reaching out to you with those. So students, you may have heard a lot of terms and you may have been introduced to a lot of concepts during this session that you never knew about. So this is your cue to go back home and do some research, do some reading on your own. There is a lot to learn. And if you do have any questions, you can submit them to us through your coordinating teacher. So anyway, this was the big picture. Now let's focus on the specific UN convention that we are talking about through MCOP, which is the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. The CBD, it provides an international framework for conserving biodiversity, using biodiversity sustainably, and also ensuring the fair sharing of benefits from genetic resources. But it all sounds really complex, right? It all sounds very high level. So, what does this really mean in practice? Why is the CBD important? And how does it connect to everything that we're going to be doing during MCOP 7? So these are big questions. And to help us unpack all of these questions, I am delighted to invite Dr. V.B. Mathur, who is the former chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority. He has a lot of experience across international biodiversity forums, as well as national level conservation and biodiversity action. So we do have a lot to learn from his perspective. So Dr. Mathur, with that, I would like to invite you to share your screen and please begin your session.
Thank you very much, Anukriti. Can you see my slides, please?
Yes, sir, we can see your slides.
Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity. I must share with our audience that this is the 7th MCOP and I have participated in all 7. So it gives me great pleasure. Year after year, I come and interact with the audience and students all over the country. And I would also share that my task has been made a little simpler by my previous colleague Satvika, who talked about the story of the global environmental action. And she had a very nice overview of how these global agreements have evolved, beginning from 1972, coming up to 1992. So my story starts from 1992. As you heard, the Convention on the Biological Diversity. There are a number of UN conventions, but we always say that the CBD is the mother of all conventions. And everybody understands the importance of the mother. And that is where I want to very briefly talk about why are we talking about biodiversity conservation, what biodiversity means to us, what is the Convention on the Biological Diversity, and very importantly, any discourse today on biological diversity refers to this document, to this process, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which came into being in 2022. So I will be talking about that to give you an idea. And as 2 of our young colleagues will be heading off to Armenia, it will be very, very useful to understand these things. Now, talking very briefly about biodiversity, it is the variety and variability of all the things that we see. But I want to draw your attention to this person who's holding soil in his hands. What you can see, I'm sure you can recognize there are some twigs there. There are some animal life, the earthworm, which everybody recognizes. What is important is that there are millions and billions of microorganisms within this soil. And it is these microorganisms and it is this soil which determines all forest productivity. No forest can grow without soil. All agriculture productivity, no crops can grow without soil. And of course, all horticulture productivity depends on that. So these productivity on which our life depends is so very important, and a role of the biological diversity, which determines the quality of life. Yet you and I know very well that how are we treating the soil? We are adding chemicals and pollutions and whatnot and waste in that. So that is where if we want to work on the agenda that we need to improve the quality of life, then we need to take care of the plants, we need to take care of the animals, and we need to take care of the microorganisms. But what is the reality now? The biodiversity and its vital contributions to people are deteriorating. Look at the texture of the skin and the hand of the person in this picture. Everybody knows that things are not the same. They are deteriorating. But what evidence do we have? So this is what is the slide which shows the global trends. On your left are 18 services which are provided by biodiversity or nature. And we all understand the meaning of services. We buy our tickets through a travel agent, we buy our other goods through an agency. But these are services which the nature is providing free of cost. The carbon sequestration, the clean air, the soil that we require for all the productivity. And what you see on your right is the decline, the trends in that. Almost all these services are declining. And this is a very, very worrisome thing which I want to bring to your notice, that these services which are which are being provided free of cost. Imagine the services. I'm sure you've studied that much biology. You understand what pollination means. The bees and the butterflies and the insects, they are involved. These services are free, which the nature and biodiversity is providing. Where can you go and which supermarket can you go and say, give me 100 grams of pollinator services? It is not possible. It is not available. It cannot be bought. But that is where I want to draw our attention, that we need to be very much concerned about the biological diversity of our planet. This simple slide, we all wear jeans. We know how the jeans or torn jeans are fashionable, but real life is not fashion. We all understand that these stitches which are there, they may look fashionable, but they're not going to stick. And that is what is the reality of biological diversity today, that we are in the process of breaking it, impairing it, and these stitches are not going to last forever. 75% of the land area is altered, 66% of the ocean area, and same thing is happening to fresh water. So these are very, very difficult situations that we are getting into. And at the start of this MCOP, I want to bring it again. I'm sure you know them, but I want to stress again that biological diversity is very, very important basis of life. Extinctions do take place. Look what this tiny little frog is saying. Global extinction rate now is tens of hundreds of times higher to what it has been over the last 10 million years. So this is serious. These species which we are losing, and we are losing from all taxonomic group. Look at this graph, how extinctions were happening always. But what we are now concerned is the accelerated rate of extinctions, whether these are fishes, reptiles, birds, mammals, top of the line, the frogs and the toads, which are there. Not only this, see this slide, there are some 25 different variety of cattle. These cattle have adapted to the local climate, the rainfall over there, the temperature over there, the soil conditions over there. But these are gradually disappearing. And that is where when somebody asks me that how climate change is taking place and what is the guarantee and what is the evidence, the loss of these local varieties, which are adapted to a locally adapted condition, is a very, very important source of problem which needs our immediate attention now. So see this very drastic statement, the planet or our planet is collapsing. The extinction rates are going up. The populations of a large number of species are on decline. And recently there was an assessment carried out by, as Satvika mentioned, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. There is also an entity called IBIS, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which now says that we are at a risk of losing up to 1 million species of both plants and animals if we continue with business as usual. So these are some very, very worrisome figures. And the reason is that we have failed to address the critical challenges. Everybody understands how global warming and how global climate change is affecting us. Everybody understands that we should not breach the limit of 1.5 degrees C, which is where the impacts are going to be more visible. On the biological front, there is evidence of the 6th mass extinction, and there is an overall 60% decline in the vertebrate population. So these are the figures I wanted to share, and this is the scenario I want to show to make you understand. See, if you look at this bottom black line, if we continue what is called as business as usual, do nothing, just sit back and say somebody else will do it, it's not my job, it's not my endeavor to do it, then we are on this declining path and we are going to lose a large number of species. But we can bring a change. That is where we start looking positive. And you look at the yellow line in between, where increased conservation effort. You remember the famous statement in the game of soccer, bending the curve. And that is where we need to start. We are already late, but we need to start to bend this curve and move it not the way in which the bottommost figures are going, but to see that can we hold on to this process and can we reverse it? And that is what I'm going to talk to you about, what these efforts are and how you and I need to partner that. But coming back to the origin of CBD, as Satvika mentioned, 72 was Stockholm and 1992 was the year in which the countries met in Rio de Janeiro, and the origin of the Convention on Biological Diversity took place. This figure, as you see, is 3rd to 14 June 1992. So 8 years in the last and 26 years now. So 34 years ago, countries got together. And on the right, you see is the document which was prepared at that time, which talks about the Convention on Biological Diversity, of which I'm going to explain a little further. So what is the CBD? It is a legally binding international treaty which has general guidelines and principles for international governance of biological diversity. But guidelines are guidelines. We need to have a prescriptive action. So decision making takes place, an organizational framework, which I'm going to explain. And ultimately, the difficult part or the good part of the international negotiations are that this is a consensus-driven exercise. All countries need to agree. And see what is written at the bottom line. Nothing is agreed till everything is agreed. And I'm sure as a part of your MCOP exercises in the coming days and the coming months, you will have some more exercises on that what is the negotiation and what is the consensus building and how it needs to take place. But coming back to the 3 objectives of CBD, the one, of course, is very obvious, the conservation of biological diversity. In situ conservation, ex situ conservation, but all forms of conservation are important. Then we just don't want to conserve it. We also want to use some of the components in a sustainable manner, of course. So sustainable use of biological diversity, what are the principles, what are the processes, what are the regulations we need to discuss. And lastly, and most importantly, which is the most difficult part of conventions and particularly the CBD, it talks about fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of utilization of genetic resources. And I'm sure my young colleagues are aware that the large amount of pharmaceutical industry is dependent upon plants and soils and other things that are derived from that. And everybody wants to access these benefits. But what we are saying, what India is spearheaded, is that yes, access is possible, but we need to share those benefits. So if you are a big pharmaceutical company making all kinds of money from your drugs, which are very, very important and life-saving, you need to share those benefits with the local communities which are involved in protection. Imagine a large number of Indian communities, the local communities. My colleagues from Kerala and South India know the role played by the Kani tribes. They are the ones who are protecting that resource. And when the big pharmaceutical company like Pfizer or Glaxo or something else comes in, they want to take the benefit out of it, but they don't want to share. And they make pharmaceutical products or drugs and then market them and they patent them. So these are some things which are very, very actively debated and in the global world. And when you will have the opportunity of seeing or participating in the negotiations, you will know that how we need to be fair and how we need to be equitable when it comes to utilization of genetic resources. Satvika did mention about how CBD or how conventions work. We need to have institutional arrangements. No policy, no treaty, no agency, no convention can work if we don't have these processes laid down. And that is what every convention I talk about the CBD has done. So what you see here and what you will be hearing in the next 5 days, in fact, the title of your course itself is MCOP. So M, we understand, is model, and COP stands for Conference of Parties. So this is what I'm going to explain in the next few minutes, that what this Conference of Parties does And as you can see, this conference of party is physically situated or located in a secretariat. I'll be showing about that. It has the technical bodies which are there. It has relationship with other conventions, and it also has financial mechanisms for doing that. This is the, if you go to Montreal, or if you ever have a chance to go to Montreal, go for sightseeing, go everywhere, but see this building, which was in 1996, the secretariat was established. A large number of people who are involved in biological diversity conservation, they sit in this office. So this is all conventions have offices. Satvika mentioned about the role of Nairobi in Kenya, and this is the convention on biological diversity, which is housed in Montreal. But the most important body is what is called as the COP, the Conference of Party. It is the highest organ. It is like the governing body. All the my colleagues from schools know that even schools have a governance mechanism chaired or led by the principal, but he will have his advisors and board of directors and whatever. So that which takes decision for the school. Same thing is for the convention. The COP takes the highest decision-making body. It's a framework treaty. It takes up decisions, and these decisions, interestingly, are called as COP decisions. So conference of parties in which everybody participates, they decide, they meet, they talk about different matters, and they take a decision. Interestingly, in the case of CBD, the meetings take place every 2 years. 16 meetings of conference of party have taken place. What is interesting, many of you were not even born in 2012, where India had the unique privilege of hosting the 11th Conference of Parties in the city of Hyderabad, where hundreds and thousands of people came from all over the world. But what is important for this exercise today, that the 17th COP meeting will be held very soon in a place, Yerevan, in the country Armenia, from 19th to 30th October. And I am very pleased to note that at least 2 of our colleagues will have a lifetime opportunity to participate and see for themselves what goes on inside the convention and the treaty. So every treaty, every convention has programs of work, and many of you will understand that when we talk of biodiversity, it could be agriculture biodiversity, it could be forest biodiversity, it could be island biodiversity. So what the CBD does, all forms of biodiversity matters relating to that are discussed, they are decided, they are implemented, they are monitored. But there are certain things which are cross-cutting. Cross-cutting means that it is not just that in agriculture biodiversity, gender is important. It is important in forest diversity. It is happening other forms of biodiversity. So this, what you see on your screen, are large number of issues on which the CBD discusses. It could be gender, it could be taxonomy, it could be traditional knowledge, it could be protected areas. For each of these, the CBD then has a program of work, which is very actively pursued, very actively monitored by different countries on that. So coming back to the main functions of the COP, developing rules and procedures, adoption of budgets, creation of technical bodies, steering the implementation, adoption of program of work, consideration of national reports. See, there are 195 countries in the world which are party to the convention. And every time the convention meets, the CBD meets, they will require the countries to present their national report. So India also has the privilege of presenting all its report so far. Every 2 years, we have presented that report, which is prepared through a very, very consultative process and through scientific institutions, policy makers, decision makers. So in very brief, the COP is the main decision body for this particular convention. I now want to move to the little part of it, which is the what I said in December 22, the world itself gave a new framework, the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was developed in the city of Kunming and Montreal. These were the COVID days, as you would recall. So the physical meeting in Kunming and Montreal did not take place, but toward the end, when in October or December 2022, the 15th CBD meeting took place, and it prepared what is called as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. No, mark my words, no decision, no discussion on biodiversity conservation can take place without reference to this document. So this framework has 4 goals. It has 23 targets. As you can see here, what is the ultimate goal when we talk of biological diversity? Living in harmony with nature. And I'm sure as students, you understand what living in harmony means. We need to look at the nature in a different way. And therefore, this Kunming-Montreal framework has 4 goals on ecosystem, species, and genetic diversity. It then has on nature's contribution to people. It talks about benefit sharing, and it talks about means of implementation. So there are 4 goals. And in addition to that, there are 23 targets. And I'm very sure that when you will be asked to conduct some exercises, these targets are cross-cutting. They talk about from gender to finance to spatial analysis and increasing the conservation space. So all aspects of biodiversity are covered under these 23 targets. And when the CBD meets, it wants countries to report that what have you done. In 2022, you agreed that we will follow the 4 goals and we will work on the 23 targets. Now in 2026, when you come in Armenia, we will be asked to report on that. And that is what the Indian think tank led by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the scientific institutions, and a large number of people are working on that. So lastly, what I want to say, there is a term I want to introduce to you, which is theory of change. We all want that the change should occur. Sometimes we say that transformative change should happen. But how or what is the basis of this change? And that is what, when this Kunming-Montreal framework was being prepared, and I had the good fortune of participating in this negotiation over a 3-year period, we then worked out and say that, okay, what is that which causes change? And as you can see on the left, there are indirect drivers and there are direct drivers. That means change in land use, direct exploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species or weeds are the direct drivers of that. And what the country has done, Satvika mentioned about IUCN and I have mentioned about IBIS, they work together to tell to the world what is the current status, how many ecosystems and how much ecosystems are degraded, how much species and genetic losses are occurring, and how is human well-being jeopardized. So when we had these 3 things in mind, the indirect drivers, the direct drivers, and the current status, then we went on and said, okay, what is the mission? And that is where countries provided inputs and said that we will have a 2030 mission and a 2050 vision, and these goals are there. And you can see toward the right, 2050, that is what the target now stands. Although we are already in 2026, in the next couple of years, we will be approaching 2030 and 2050. But the vision is living in harmony with nature. And that is what my expectation is, that when you are part of the MCOP exercises, you will be asked to take up a project or an activity to demonstrate that how living in harmony can be achieved, what kind of challenges are there, what kind of actions which are to be taken. So lastly, what are the challenges? The challenges are very clear. We ourselves gave 23 targets. These targets encompass all aspects of biodiversity. They include communities, they include corporates, they include civil society. Each one has a target, it has an indicator. We need to fulfill them and achieve them. And as I said, the CBD, the GBF, the Global Framework, was negotiated very intensively over a 3-year period. Now the question is that we have the framework, we have the goals, we have the targets before us, but how do we achieve them? And interestingly, the most important part, I would say, nothing can happen without funds. So the biggest challenge for biodiversity conservation, and I want to bring it to a kind notice, that we need to secure funds for conservation. But what is the requirement? Of course, these requirements have been worked out by different agencies at somewhere between US $722 billion to US $967 billion annually is the requirement. So somewhere around 700 to 800 billion, if I were to say, US dollars are the annual requirement for conserving biodiversity or achieving these 23 targets which I talked about. But then what we have? What we have is very, very low. We have figures of having $124 billion to $150 billion. So that means there is a funding gap of as much as $700 billion every year. So this is a huge figure, and that is where the entire emphasis is shifting. The developing world, India is spearheading in that, along with the global south, that unless the developed world or the global north provides funds, we will not be able to meet these things, and we will not be able to achieve what we are setting ourselves for 2030 and 2050. And finally, I want to repeat again that in the CBD policy and practice, nothing is agreed till everything is agreed. It is not a simple thing. I'm sure as friends and colleagues and students, you also do this consensus. Maybe at some other point of time, we will be talking about what these negotiations means and what these negotiations are. So I think that was what I wanted to say. Lastly, I want to bring to your notice that I have talked about the CBD and said that it is mother of all conventions, but there are other 7 conventions. The CITES Convention, which deals with endangered trade in animals. There is a convention on migratory species. There are 2 plant-based conventions. Then we have the Ramsar Convention on the wetlands. And again, very importantly, we have the World Heritage Convention and all the natural sites in India. For example, the Kevla Dev, the Kaziranga, the Manas are all part of that convention. And the cultural sites are led by the Qutub Minar and the Jantar Mantar and so on. So these 7 conventions are very, very important. Please keep it at the back of your mind. Each convention needs a very thorough, rigorous understanding, which both Satvika and myself are saying that you need to provide and apply your mind and time to understand them. So that was what I wanted to share with you. I hand it back to Anukriti, how we deal with that question now, or maybe later we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mathur. That was truly an insightful session. And thank you so much for sticking by us through all 7 editions of MCOP as well. So students, I'm certain that that was an impactful session for all of you as well, and that you did understand a lot about the CBD and its role in global biodiversity action. So you may have a lot of questions, you may have a lot of thoughts coming out of this session. So if there's anything that you'd like to ask Dr. Mathur, do send your questions to your teacher, and your teacher will be able to compile those questions and share them with us. And then we will further ask Dr. Mathur for his inputs on any of those questions. We'll also share the responses with you later in case anyone has questions. So now, as we continue exploring the vibrant, beautiful world of biodiversity action, let's bring in one very important perspective, that is the voice of young people. So here we have representatives from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, or GYBN, and it is a global network of young people such as yourself and youth organizations working to strengthen youth participation in biodiversity conservation and decision making. So GYBN is kind of like a, let's say, subsection of the Convention on Biological Diversity that focuses just on youth action. So we have a lot of questions with us when it comes to this theme. What does meaningful youth action look like? How can young people contribute to global biodiversity efforts? And what kinds of opportunities are out there for young people to get involved? So to help us answer all of these questions, I am very happy to invite Sudha Kautilil and Shruti Kautilil from the India Youth Biodiversity Network here to join us. So they are both very passionate ecologists and researchers, and they are part of the Gibbon Global team. and they're coordinators for the India chapter of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. So Sudha and Shruti, I would like to invite both of you to please take over and share your screen in case you do have slides.
Thank you so much, Anukriti. I'm just sharing my screen now. Just let me know once you can see it.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Shruti, and on this important topic, I'm just about to. I would just start our conversations and then hand it over to Sudha to continue. So, just going off based on what our previous speakers have also very well put on the introduction to the different MEAs as well as Mathur sir's introduction to the CBD. We now go into the more important or critical role of what youth can do. That includes all of you who are on this call as well for taking part in this MCOP 7. What difference can you make, and how do you think youth action can be used as a leverage point to bring about transformative change, not just at the policy level but also on the ground? So to just maybe start off the discussion, to give you an overview of what this kind of environmental state we are in, is that, as you all know, we are part of that. We now have the triple planetary crisis, which is the biodiversity loss, climate change, as well as issues related to plastic, as well as pollution. So these are what we collectively called as the triple planetary crisis. And this is just a study that was done, I think, in 2009 by John Rockstrom on the planetary boundaries. So what he did with a team of Earth scientists is that he measured the human impact or the impact of human extractive nature on 9 of the most critical Earth processes. So here you can see, you have some of the examples are the land use change, climate change, the use of fresh water, and things like that. And what they found was that out of the 9 critically important environmental or Earth processes, about 7 of them had overshot their capacity. So that means we had exploited about 7 of these processes for our use, and they were used beyond the safe limit. So as you can see, the dotted line is the safe limit. The bold line is the safe limit, and the dotted line is the maximum to which you can use. And you can see that a lot of them have overshot the regenerative or rebuilding capacities. So this brings us to an important question of how it impacts the different stakeholders or the different sections of society. Because I think, as was mentioned before, we see that the impacts of several of these issues are not distributed equally. Many of the people in the global south, as we call it, are impacted much more than people who are living in the global north. So it has come to a point where most of the biodiversity rich areas or biodiversity hotspots tend to be concentrated in the global south, as you can see with the regions that are marked in green, as compared to, say, areas in Europe and North America, which are already developed at the cost of the ecological footprint. So the onus now more lies on the global north countries to be able to sort of bring back the lost biodiversity or contribute in a manner which supports the biodiversity or the ecosystems that we currently have in the global south. And if you're looking at the impacts of biodiversity loss and climate change, it's also very clear to us that the people who are most impacted are not necessarily people who are at the forefront of this crisis. For example, the indigenous communities, the local communities, for example, the fisher folk communities, who tend to be more impacted by the change in climate or biodiversity loss than, say, any of us who might be sitting on this call. So it's important for us to ask the questions of who are the people most likely to be impacted by by biodiversity loss or land degradation, and who are the people who are actually making these decisions, and if they are, and how much are they impacted by it. So this then brings us to the question of youth participation, because young people form a very important component or a section of society who are actively working towards many of these crises that I just talked about. So this is just from a survey that Gibbon did on what are the different elements or the different projects or campaigns that young people are driving all over the world. So this is not just in India or Asia, this is all over the world. As you can see, that we have a lot of different activities ranging from education to research to campaigning to creating awareness to bird watching, cleanup drives, restoration work, species conservation. So these are all of the different elements that young people are working on. But what happens to most of the work that we're doing is that it becomes invisible. Because youth, we know that youth are impacted just like any other marginalized group or any other members of society who are working on the ground. Youth are also an important stakeholder, and they are also most affected by biodiversity loss and climate change. And despite the amount of work that they're doing, most of our contributions, our perspectives remain largely invisible or undervalued. And this is something that Gibbon is actively trying to change, and we've managed to do that over based on our participation over the last 15 to 20 years. Yeah, and how we're doing is that most of the institutions, they don't consider this youth work or include youth work in their statistical calculations towards the implementation of the goals and targets for the KMGBF. So as you saw that we had about 23 goals and targets under the KMGBF, and most of the institutions that work towards understanding this progress don't usually include youth work or youth-led action. And what we are here as Gibbon trying to change is to ensure that youth are meaningfully included in decisions, and also that our work are considered towards the implementation of the KMGBF. So just to give you an overview of what Gibbon is, we are a global coordination platform for young people. We were founded in 2010, but in 2012, we were recognized officially by the CBD, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity, as the official coordination platform for youth participation. So what we have at the CBD is something called as an observer status. So we have the ability to make interventions at COP negotiations where parties or country delegates really discuss these policy texts and these policy decisions. And we have the opportunity to make changes and recommendations to these texts. We are a community that is established globally. So we have chapters in North America, South America, Latin America, Europe, Africa, Asia, as well as the Oceania Pacific. And you can see the numbers on the left side of the slide. We had about 70 national chapters over six regions, and we have about 120 ground projects. We have also brought a number of youth delegates, close to 200 to 300 youth delegates over the different COPs that we have had in the years. The largest delegation was about, I think, 500 accredited as well as funded for COP 15 in Montreal in Canada. So how we work is that our collective vision is based on three of these priorities. So how we do is we do consultations globally all over the world. And these are the three priorities that young people have identified as being important for them. So one is to maintain the integrity of our life support system, which is biodiversity nature. Second one is that we should ensure that diverse societies live sustainably. And third is finding equity for people and nature. So this is having a rights-based approach to people and nature, meaning that conservation should take into account the rights of nature as well as people, and that they should go hand in hand. And these are just some of the activities that we do. So our work is largely along these three pillars, which is knowledge and capacity building, community building, groundwork, alliance building, narrative change, and advocacy and policy action. So these are 4 pillars of work. And how we do it is through collective well-being, accountability, transparency, human rights, through bringing a connection to nature and culture, and also through diversity and inclusive participation. Yeah, and these are some of the thematic areas that we work in. So so we often work with women caucuses to have a more gender responsive approach to our priorities. We work on peace and conflict, on system change, on rights and empowerment, poverty, wealth, and justice as well. And yeah, quickly also then on IYBN. So we are the Indian chapter for Gibbon. As I mentioned, we are established all over the world. We have chapters in India as well, and we've been working on it since 2018 when we had the COP in Hyderabad. Currently, we have about 11 state chapters in India with over 200 members and 5,000 volunteers contributing to our goals and objectives. And all of our work falls under the bigger theme of Gibbon, which is to work on transformative and meaningful inclusion of young people at different in the different stages of the biodiversity conservation. Now I hand it over to Sudha to continue. Hi everyone. So I think I'll talk about some examples of youth action, and I think all of these examples are things that or some of you would already be doing, and maybe some ideas on what you can potentially do. So I would be covering mostly the examples of youth action as well as activities of Gibbon. Next slide. So these are some. I'll go into these in detail, but just to give you an overview about the diversity of activities that young people are doing all over the world. One would be policy and advocacy. So by policy, it means Gibbon is the coordination platform to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So we are one of our major activities that young people undertake is policy and advocacy. And this is not just true for the biodiversity space, but you have similar youth networks working in the climate space, in the UN CCD, the Desertification Convention. And then you have a lot of youth networks also working on national level policies across the world. So policy and advocacy is one example. Then you have on-ground actions. So these on-ground actions can be in different ways, from being researchers and working on conservation to, volunteering your time and effort to say certain NGOs or for education. All of them contribute to on-ground actions. And then you have awareness raising, where you're raising awareness on a specific topic. And then you have campaigns, where campaigns are slightly long-term events where you are campaigning for certain priorities and certain needs for the society at the global level or at the national level. Next slide. So this is an example of policy advocacy, and I have taken an example from GYBN, Gibbon. The picture that you see on the left is a small group of our policy team who was engaging in the last cycle of COP. This is just a small group of the policy team as a larger Gibbon community. And what you see on the right, you can see letters that says IIFB, and then you can see the second paragraph which says Gibbon. Now, this is a proposal that Gibbon had submitted on education, and one of our main priorities that we have identified through consultations that we have done globally. So by consultation, I mean a meeting or a series of meetings which we organize to understand youth priorities. So through this consultation, transformative education is something that came out quite strongly across all of our global consultations. And by transformative education, it means education that is holistic. So all over the world, it was identified that education, specifically on nature education, is not holistic. Like, we're not taught so much about the complexity of biodiversity or the complexity of socio-ecological crisis, and how tackling it is a very complex and circular process and not linear. So this paragraph that you see, the second paragraph that you see, was integrated into the KMGBF and the specific word of transformative education. And this could only happen because there was lobbying. So by lobbying, what it means is that we speak to party or country delegations, and we talk about what young people are seeing as being important. And some of the countries agree and identify this as being an important topic. And when we speak in these rooms where decisions are being made, the countries who we speak to and who agree to support us kind of support us, saying that we agree with the youth priority that was raised. And the minute a country shows their support, it's integrated into the text, and then it is being spoken about or discussed within different countries. So this is how a youth voice is integrated into an international context. And this is just an example of where policy and advocacy go hand in hand. And the picture that you see at the very bottom is from one of our national chapters advocating at their national level. The next slide.
So this is an example of on-ground action. I think all of you would be familiar. Some of them are from Pakistan, Afghanistan. Then you have an international conference on the top right that you see, like 4 people holding a mic. This was from an international conference that Gibbon organized in Japan in 2 years back. And on the left, very left, you see a country from Africa where they're working on restoration. So all of them are examples of on-ground action where some of them are engaging in schools to talk about bring about nature education. Then you have conservation, restoration, and biodiversity mapping. So a lot of our national chapters in India work exclusively also on biodiversity mapping, where they work with local biodiversity management committees to map the local biodiversity in the area. And then you have networks, chapters that work on food systems and marine ecosystems. And then there are actions that focus solely on building the capacity of young people. So telling them what biodiversity, what CBD is, what COP is, how can you engage at the international level, how can you engage at the national level. And the importance of all of these activities is that it is by youth and for youth. So young people are leading these activities for young people. And as Gibbon, we also have fellowships. So these fellowships are small grant amounts that chapters receive to work on the priorities that they have identified. So Martha sir spoke about how funding is very difficult for biodiversity. And so it's even more difficult for youth to access these funding. So Gibbon is trying to change how we can access these funding for biodiversity for youth to act on different biodiversity actions. So this is an example of what all of you can also do at your local level to build awareness or to work on certain biodiversity actions. The next slide, I'll keep it short. Again, so now after COVID, online space has become very important, although it's very, there is an inequality aspect to it that not everybody in the world has access to internet, stable internet. So, but still, online capacities go a big way because funding to have in-person events is very difficult. So what you see on the left is a photograph from one of our online capacity building workshops that was done to understand how our actions can become conflict sensitive. That is, you make it inclusive by engaging different stakeholders. Then we have knowledge materials where we break down these discussions and decisions that happen at COP in simple language that young people can understand. We also share our priorities of what youth are advocating for in these different COPs. And then we had a very successful campaign, which is called Stop the Same, which is stopping the same business as usual scenario that happens world over, like the same profit-driven society where you prioritize money over nature. So these kind of activities need to be changed, and that is one of our strongest campaigns. And the one that we have currently is Youth into Action, where we are advocating for young people to be considered as implementers of this global framework, rather than being invisible or being considered as beneficiaries. The next slide, and maybe I can quickly say that one of the important aspects of CBD is to consider youth as being talks about a whole of society approach, which means everybody in a society has an important contribution to achieve the targets of the Cumming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and youth is a big stakeholder in that contribution. So next slide, we'll just look into youth contributions very quickly. And some of the points that you need to remember that I mentioned before as youth are important stakeholders. We are not just beneficiaries of education, but we have important contributions to make. No action is small. It can be an awareness raising in your society. It can be working with a school, working with a university, or working even in a cleanup drive. So any action that you're able to take is not small. They contribute to a bigger picture. You have to work in a community. You have to work as a community and kind of speak in a unified voice. Most often, what happens is that it becomes a fight to reach a limelight, which is not the case. Like you're not speaking as an individual, but you're speaking as a youth community. And it's very important to remember that you are representing a community's voice rather than your voice. The second is dialogue and discussion is important. Activism plays a very important role, but it's also important to remember that dialogue and discussion can go a very, very long way. And that's what has helped Gibbon achieve the stage that it has got. And the fifth one is to question whatever is happening. So not to take in whatever you see blindly, but to question why is it happening? Is it the right way for it to happen? And all of these different questions. The next slide. So you can contribute to biodiversity action by engaging in community-based conservation. So you can be a part of these different restoration activities. You can be a part of different education activities. You can identify the local issues and priorities that are happening in your area. You can do digital advocacy and awareness, including citizen science. You have different platforms to document biodiversity in your local landscape. Then you can actively reach out to local government agencies in your area. You can work with indigenous youth. You can work to change the narratives and behavior. So behavioral change is a very important aspect of biodiversity conservation, because the way you behave or the way you understand an ecosystem directly translates to how you will care about that ecosystem. And then the seventh is holding institutions, even if it's businesses, accountable for what they're doing. The next slide, I think that's the last few slides. The next slide. Bring the next slide.
Just change. Change.
Yeah, so after MCOP, what you can do is you can contribute to these different actions, whatever is feasible for you, whatever is accessible to you, because many of you are in schools. So it can be through your eco clubs, it can be through certain NGOs that you know and you want to work with. In between your, so all this keeping in mind that some of you are in school. So whatever you can do through some of the examples that I've shown above. You can join networks like Gibbon, IYBN, or other national or local level networks that has a vision that you strongly identify with. You can create awareness spaces and also open these spaces for other young people to build their capacity, because a lot of these spaces are not accessible. So you need to strongly also push and include other young people into these conversations and discussions. And then whenever opportunities open up for engagement at the national level, be it to engage in policy, be it to engage in giving your voice, or to show your priority, to show your actions, engage in all of these open opportunities that come up. And I think we'll be happy to share these opportunities that come up. And I think we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. But I think this was the last slide. So thank you so much for listening. And I hope Anukriti can give it to you.
Thank you so much, Sudha and Shruti, for joining us and sharing such detailed insight into the work that you do, and also for offering some very clear pathways for our students here on how they can also engage in similar spaces as yours. So, to all the students, I would like to say that this was the last session for the day, but we do have one last thing for all of you before you head back to your classes or head back home. So let's quickly do a quick recap of what we learned today. So today was all about getting familiar with the world of biodiversity and conservation that you're about to step into. We first looked at where MCOP comes from, what it's all about, and what we expect from you as MCOP delegates. And then we heard from people who have been part of this journey before. And we then also explored how countries all over the world come together to address environmental challenges through MEAs or multilateral environmental agreements. And then we did bring the conversation closer to the overarching theme over here, which is biodiversity, through Dr. Mathur's session, which covered the Convention on Biological Diversity. And then finally, the session we just concluded, we heard about all the ways in which young people fit into this larger picture of conservation. So over the next few days, up until Friday, we're going to move from understanding all of these ideas that we've been introduced to today to also thinking about what they mean for action in our own communities. And eventually, all of these learnings, all of that action will come down to the specific target that you pick for your community. And we will be discussing all of this in detail soon. So before we conclude, we have a little bit of a homework for you. So let's look at that. So today, when you go back home or when you go back to your classes, we would like you to explore a very unique experience that we have on One Planet Academy, which is WWF India's digital learning center, to put it simply. So if you scan the QR code over here, it will take you to an interactive 360-degree virtual experience of the Andaman and the Nicobar Islands. Does that sound exciting? Has anyone here been to the Andaman Islands ever before? You can write it in the chat. Have you visited the islands? You have. Okay, that's fantastic. Very nice, very nice. So there are also a lot of students who haven't visited the Andaman and Nicobar Islands ever before. Or in fact, I'm also seeing some students who haven't visited any islands before. So this is a great opportunity for you to, learn all about the unique biodiversity and the unique communities of island ecosystems, and this is something that you can do at your own pace as well. So, but for this homework's purpose, I encourage you all to hop onto One Planet Academy and explore the ecosystems through this virtual experience. And I would like you all to think about the ecosystems that you encounter, all the species that you learn about, all the various landscapes that you see, and also there will be a lot that you learn about the communities that are present on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So read about that as well. So most importantly, I also want all of you to start noticing the connections that exist between people, nature, and people and nature. I think that's the simplest way to put it. So don't rush through this homework, and it will not be graded or marked, but we do have some questions for you tomorrow when you return for day 2 of the MCOP 7 virtual conference. So we are going to keep this QR code here so that you can scan it. And in the meantime, if anyone has any questions for any of our speakers from today, you can let us know in the chat, or you can also just submit them to your teacher. If anyone has any questions about the MCOP 7 process, or about the agenda, or about any of the sessions that are coming up throughout the week, now is your time to ask, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. You can ask now, please, if you do have any doubts. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions. That's fantastic. Okay, I'm just going to pause. No questions. All right, great. So with that, I want to thank you all once again for so patiently, so passionately sitting here for all of the expert sessions that we had in line for you. And we are super excited for you to come back tomorrow, completely refreshed and all set for a new set of sessions. And there is so much to be learned. There is so much to be done. So make sure that you look through your notes, and in case any of your friends or your classmates have missed this session, just let them know that we will be sharing the recording from today by 3 or 4 p.m. today. So teachers, please make note of this as well, and do share the recording with anyone who wasn't able to attend. So I do see a question. So yes, you do need to use this QR code specifically to learn about the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. But if it does interest you a lot, you can learn about it beyond this specific QR too. But we do promise you that once you do hop onto the website that is behind this QR code, it will be an experience like none other. So do dedicate a little bit of time to exploring it. All right, students and teachers, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, we bring today to an end. Thank you so much.